All right, it is now 14:30 GMT, so we are going to resume. So again, thank you for sticking around, and I am going to share my screen with the conference planning document. If you're not already in here, I certainly would encourage you to join. As usual, this is not going to be a particularly structured event. We can sort of see where it takes us. But my hope is that we can talk about not just what we should do in the coming year, but also how we will do it. And, as in the past, the document's divided into a few sections where we can, take note of sort of community tasks that we want to take on, maybe broad goals, things that we want to target specifically for the 8.1 and 9.0 releases, and also a catch-all at the bottom here for other ideas and projects that come up during the conversation. And please feel free if you have requests or suggestions or code to offer to just start dropping things into the other ideas list. At the end of the session, we will go through that and map everything into Jira so that all these ideas will be captured and there's a place where people can vote to prioritize things. I thought to get things started, I might talk a little bit about what my own plans are for the coming year, and then we can see where the conversation goes from there. So, as I mentioned on the first day, the It Takes a Village project has been really helpful from a community development and sustainability perspective to give us some ideas. Um, we're going to be working with them on a beta test of their module about resources, which means fundraising and other sort of tangible things that support the project. So I think in January and February, there will be a lot of thought about this, and there will probably be some kind of a membership drive. So stay tuned for that. Um, I think the project management committee provides a really good place for this kind of community planning to take place. So I don't know that we need to spend a lot of time today talking about this when there are also large technical matters to address, but I'm certainly happy to take ideas. And if people are interested in getting more involved and are not already on the PMC, please feel free to reach out to me and we can talk about how that all works. Moving on to sort of technical updates that I see on the roadmap. The biggest goal is to get a beta version of a new theme into release 8.1. As I said, this is really overdue. We've been talking about it for a couple of years, but we haven't quite been able to get it to all come together, though there has been a lot of sort of behind the scenes movement that supports the new theme. So it's not like we haven't been doing anything. But anyway, my hope is that we can start working on significantly refactoring existing themes in the Dev 9.0 branch so that we can have some backward breaking changes in 9.0 that really improve the existing themes. And that in parallel with that effort, we can start porting all of the theme templates to the new theme design so that all of this will be in 9.0. But for 8.1, without making breaking changes to the existing themes, we can just backport and drop in the new theme there so that people can try it out and see what they're going to get. This plan may evolve, but that's sort of my ideal goal of getting this out the door before too long as part of a feature release without introducing backward breaks, but also taking all of these improvements and enhancements we're developing for the new theme and applying them to what we already have so we can take advantage of them everywhere. I'm really looking to Chris to lead this project, but certainly I will be supporting it. And I know there are a lot of people out there who have strong feelings and interest in the theme, and I certainly hope that they can participate in this process. And again, I'm very open to suggestions about how to bring all of that together. And I think that might be something we can all talk about today at some length. But before we dive into that, I also just wanted to talk about other things for 9.0 that I view as pretty big. And these are architectural things. There are a couple of key packages that we rely on heavily, the Laminas DB and Laminas HTTP libraries, which are at end of life essentially and are not going to be supported going forward. So we need to replace them with alternatives. From my perspective, I think Laminas DB is the thing most urgently in need of replacement because I really don't see a future for that. And we use it extensively and in complex ways. So I think it's going to be a big job to swap out. I mean, on the positive side, I think this is an opportunity to review some of our decisions and perhaps do some things more elegantly, but it's also not going to be a simple drop-in replacement. Laminas HTTP I view as less critical. I think that this library is going to continue to live. It's just sort of outdated and it doesn't have a bright future. So if we can replace it, I think we should, but if it slides on to VuFind 10, I don't think that will be a crisis. So Laminas DB is my personal top development priority as time permits. And I confess I have a couple of huge migration projects unrelated to VuFind that will be taking up a lot of my time in the coming year. So I don't want to overcommit myself, but Laminas DB is the thing that I feel probably needs some of my input and time, and I'm going to try to make sure I have the availability to do that. Another architectural detail that needs work is the way that we retrieve Facet data from Solr. As has been discussed at past summits, there are multiple Solr Facet APIs now that work a little differently. And we've been using the legacy one forever because why change something that isn't broken? But it's going to become broken at some point in the future because it has now been officially deprecated. So we really need to take the time to look at the new API and translate or map all of our functionality so that we have future-proof compatibility with Solr. And I'm hoping that perhaps some others in the community can take the lead on that, though, as always, I'm happy to review and consult and test and so forth. Beyond that, there are links in this document to existing JIRA tickets that are tagged at particular releases, but I think it's mostly smaller and less exciting things. So yeah, that's my attempt to get the ball rolling. And I see that Chris has added on the other ideas list the idea of updating our JavaScript build process, which I think is also either part of or complement to the new theme. The fact that right now we're using Grunt to build CSS from less, and all of the tooling hasn't really been reviewed in many years, while the JavaScript ecosystem has been moving and evolving dramatically. I think we should definitely take another look at that and see if we can make it more modern and aligned with current practices. And again, that's an area where hearing from the community what you would like to see and what you are using would be helpful so that we make decisions that are beneficial to everyone rather than disruptive. So with that, I'm going to open the floor and see if anyone has anything they'd like to add or talk about. Once again, if you are in the audience and you'd like to join this conversation more directly, feel free to say something in the chat and I can bring you onto the panel. Otherwise, I will ask what others think. I see that Anonymous Dolphin is typing into the other ideas list the citation style language issue from JIRA, which has an open but underdeveloped, under-tested pull request accompanying it. This is the idea of adjusting VuFind's internal citation generation to use CSL, which might let us leverage libraries to format citations instead of having to do all that logic ourselves. I think that's a very interesting project that if somebody has time to play with, could be of great benefit to us.
Yeah, so actually I added that point, and I could say a few more words if we have the time about it.
Please feel free.
Okay, so there has been some work done on that before. I think there's an open pull request, but by Mathieu Grimaud, I think he's called. But this is like an old issue from 2019. So he has experimented with it. There's been a library to with something like proof of concept to make sure that it works. But like there's still some work to be done on the final integration of it, and also working more on the details. So in Tübingen, we have discovered that this is also a problem for us as well. So we would be willing to take part in the issue. However, I'm not sure if we can take it over all by ourselves. So it would be pretty interesting to know who in the community might also have an interest in working on that feature. Maybe also to share some thoughts on that. I remember a few years ago, we also implemented the metadata vocabulary feature in VuFind to export things like, for example, high wire press. And the central part of this CSL is also how do we convert the data that a record driver delivers into the input format of the CSL. And I'm not sure if we should do this with a minimalistic approach and hard code it pretty much like in the example, or if since the amount of the vocabularies we support is increasing, it might be time to put in some intermediate layer and say, okay, we have like a intermediate format, like some description via SCOS or another framework, and then be able to map to the other frameworks from there. But that might be too heavyweight, and it's just an idea. So for now, I think, first of all, it would be like the question, who else is interested in working on that topic in the community?
And I would encourage people who are interested to comment or vote on the JIRA ticket. That's a good way to register your interest. I am, of course, myself interested in this too, and within the constraints on my time, I'm interested in collaborating on it. I also noticed that we have an open JIRA ticket about offering Wikipedia citation as an export format, or rather a citation display format, so that you can copy and paste a citation into a Wikipedia article. And I wonder if that ticket gets resolved automatically if this ticket gets resolved, or if that's still a separate issue. A small point, but just something I saw while I was browsing through open tickets earlier today.
Regarding CSL, I just noticed that there is a package in packages.org. I just put it in the chat. That might be useful.
I think there's some existing package that's being used in the pull request proof of concept. I'm not sure if it's the same one or not. If it's not the same, we should compare and see which one we prefer.
That's actually exactly the package that was used in the example.
Okay, right. Okay. In that case, I should just familiarize myself with the pull request instead of suggesting things.
Yeah, certainly, I think there's a lot of room to talk about configuration and whether this completely replaces what we have or somehow complements it. And so having a few people try this out, review the code, and start a conversation, I think is the best way to get the ball rolling. So anyone who has time to do that first, please start, and then we'll talk from there.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. So if I can put you on the spot, Chris, do you want to say a little more about theme plans, or raise areas where people might be able to help?
Yeah, definitely. There are a few areas that I really want to get feedback from the community. One of them is the updated JavaScript tool. I'm trying to figure out an easy way to do a poll and put it in the Google Doc, but I haven't yet figured out a good way to do that. Of like what tools people are using and what direction we should take this in. I've looked around the tool space myself, and I haven't found one that would make it really easy to do the theme inheritance that we have. So given that we're probably going to have to build something custom anyway, I'm fairly open to which tool is used. As far I just want to touch briefly on something that Damien and I were discussing about the new theme that I think will actually take it in an interesting direction, is moving a lot more of the theme customization config into the theme config file. So moving a lot of the choices of like what is displayed and how it's displayed and what order it's displayed in out of the config files, the config INIs, and into the theme config files. I think this would be a clear change and help us declutter some of our INI things. But that's just another thing that's an overall approach that's been talked about recently. And I guess the last bit that is definitely debatable and definitely the thing I want a lot of community support or community feedback on is getting rid of the redundancy that we have between less and Sass. We're mostly writing things in less and porting them to Sass, but there's been a larger adoption of just Sass among the wider web development community, like in Bootstrap and other similar projects. I'm personally interested in post CSS, which might allow users to use whichever syntax they like best and pick and choose. But those are kinds of things that I really want to. I feel really need to be discussed and figured out and nailed down before we get to the 9.0 release. Maybe a better place for that would be a pull request, which is something I was really trying to get in place before the conference, but wasn't able to pull off. So sometime in the next month or two, hopefully a pull request so that the progress and the approach can be documented better. That's about as high level view as I can give without getting too bogged down in the details. Because I am interested in feedback, and I'm afraid that if I give too many details, it's just going to get lost in the shuffle. So if anyone has strong feelings, I do like starting with strong feelings.
I feel like there's not a lot of strong emotion running through our session so far, but maybe we're just not trying hard enough to get people riled up.
I mean, I've been seeing in this summit and previous summits and in submissions, people have done some really incredible work with customizing VuFind's themes and making it look beautiful and have some real interesting changes to the themes. And I guess I was wondering if any of that came about from an improvement in tooling over top of what VuFind currently offers, or if everyone's working within those constraints. And if the first is true, I do want to hear what people are using. And if the latter is true, I want to know what people are eyeing on the other side of the fence that makes the grass look greener, so that we can make that something we use in VuFind.
Well, from our side, sorry for leaving the video off right now. Somehow my internet connection is a little bit wonky. Yes, from Leipzig, we are still using Sass, and I mean, the expert would be Klaas Katzer, obviously, but because today is actually a holiday, only few of us are online, so that's the reason why he's missing. So anyway, I think we would. It would be quite a huge effort for us to switch to another technology, right, from Sass to whatever else. So right now we are quite happy with it, but on the other hand, we are still running behind the latest VuFind version. And so our main objective will be to catch up with you in the next year. I think creating a pull request and just getting a discussion started would be a good idea, because then also we could discuss it again internally if there's any technology that we would be eager to adopt later on in the year. And so we could even work with you to do so. But right now we are very happy with SAS, and we are still actually working on improving our catalogs in terms of accessibility, which is still on our plate, so that we and we have lots of changes in the pipeline that we want to contribute to the community, but it's quite lots of work to do because we have so many catalogs. And yes, we have tons of reports that are criticizing how the catalogs are working and how you can improve them. So this is our main task right now. And but I think looking forward and discussing which technologies are better for or are more future-proof, I think is always a good thing.
Well, given that right now we're focusing on less and then translating to SAS, and I think Chris is considering maybe we don't need the less and we should just do SAS to begin with. I think that would not be objected to by the Leipzig community at this time.
No, absolutely not.
So I'd like to add something as well on that point. On our side, we're using less actually. There was some time where we created some new themes and tried to use SAS, but we have like this automatic building that builds the themes on the servers after a pull. I think we could like get rid of that, because I think as far as I know, like you build it before you commit it. So that shouldn't be much of a problem. But of course, we would have to, on the one hand, migrate all of our less templates to SAS, which might not be that much of a problem. I think there are lots of tools out there where you can have like a converter to convert less to SAS. So on the one hand, it shouldn't be that much of a problem, but we would have to test that. And on the other hand, I think if the new theme is coming, the question will also be like, what will happen to the old Bootstrap theme? Because if it will not be available anymore at some point, we might like implement our themes, our own custom themes, and migrate them to the new theme. And there might be also lots of effort behind it, because we like have a theme hierarchy, because we also have like I think 5 or 6 different instances with different themes that we would have to migrate. So there would also be some effort behind that, definitely. So I think, of course, if you think of somebody installing new VuFind from scratch and starting with the themes, I think a new theme would be good. Of course, it's also always a thing how to get on from your existing inherited themes, and that just might be quite a lot of effort for us.
Well, I think this is the reason I'm advocating for the approach of convert the existing themes to use better tooling, and then create the new theme based on the modified versions of the existing themes, because that then creates sort of a more obvious migration path where you have incremental steps that you can follow and apply to what you're doing locally. And I think we are going to, of course, have to, at least for a year or two, maintain 2 themes in parallel, so that we have support for the legacy themes that a lot of people are invested in, while also building up the new themes. But ultimately, you know, we have to do this. We're stuck in Bootstrap 3 because we want to offer stability, but Bootstrap 3 is now years past its end of life. And so that makes us look outmoded and behind the times. And I think if we develop our new theme in a more framework agnostic way, then that opens the door potentially to less disruption in the future, where we can switch things out behind the scenes, but keep the general shape of the templates the same. I mean, maintaining custom theme templates is always a bit of a challenge because things keep evolving and you have to keep up with them, but we do our best to reduce that pain at least.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking to reduce that pain with the design of the layout of the new theme. And yeah, definitely, it's a shame that your video is not working because I think you took the time to draw a family tree of themes on the whiteboard behind you for your presentation. I did appreciate that. So
I would like to add to what Mario said. We also have like something like 5,000 less files to convert. But if we need to do that, we just need to do that. It will require some work, but anything related to themes and keeping up to date is requiring work. Also, trying to manage with Bootstrap 3 is starting to require more and more work. For instance, the latest one I noticed was that the default alert and warning colors were not compliant with the accessibility guidelines and things like that. So it's starting to get a bit long in the tooth.
absolutely, and yes, don't worry. I'm absolutely not eager to make more work for anybody. If we could find an easy way to transition, that's I might even hold off until we have an easy way to transition. So I have a couple ideas on how it could be done smoothly, and I don't want to leave anyone behind. There's the family tree.
And I do gather that less to SAS conversion is not generally a terribly painful thing. You know, we have an automated script that does it for the VuFind project, but of course there are edge cases and potential problems, and testing 5,000 files is never going to be easy, even if it's a relatively trivial conversion. So
yeah, and there was tricks that we had to use to make it consistent, especially around import paths and things like that, where there's some tricky things in there that make it work that aren't ideal.
yeah, we had to add annotations for the converter, I believe. So is there anyone who actually has the Solar Facets API on their radar, or do we need to keep searching for volunteers on that one?
I think I will volunteer at some point if no one else does, but considering my track record with the previous summits and the work I've not managed to complete, it's not something I'm looking forward to.
I understand, and you know, I'm in the same position. If nobody else gets there and this is the last open ticket, I might try to spend some time on it, but I see a lot in front of me before I reach that point. So it would be great to have some support. I guess this might also be a good time for Mike to talk about his requested feature, if he'd like to, since that's not on the other ideas list yet.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So just quick introduction. My name is Mike Palmetto. I'm the systems librarian at Skidmore College. The thing I wanted to bring up actually relates to pulling in custom user fields into the user record. Now, just as a bit of background, we have recently migrated our library to Folio. And at the same time, our campus is beginning to explore ways in which to kind of record students or take students' gender identity and preferred pronouns and pass those values to the correct systems. That's going to be a long-term project and doesn't actually involve the library per se. Where it intersects with VuFind is that while I can easily create a custom field in relevant to this in Folio, and actually I've created a couple of custom fields unrelated to this. it doesn't seem that VuFind by default has the ability to take that information and display it. Now, I spoke with Demian and he advised me that it actually doesn't seem too hard to make the change. However, our instance is hosted by EBSCO, and while they've indicated they may be able to actually implement those changes for us, we can't actually contribute anything back to the project because we don't have access to our VuFind installation under the hood. So I kind of wanted to put it out there if anyone was interested in doing this sort of thing. Like I said, I can't really contribute much myself because I don't have access to a VuFind installation, but it seems like the sort of thing that would be valuable to take not just gender identity, but any custom fields one has in an ILS, and then display it in the user record. And if one wants to even go the second step and try and allow users to edit their own contact information. I know that's probably going to be more difficult, however.
Did I miss some details about this? I'm not sure. So you mean that you would like to have some user profile fields that would display in the profile?
Yeah, beyond the default ones. Demian did advise, I think it's also useful for more than just us. I think it's something maybe, it doesn't, I'm not saying we need to actually include it on the development calendar. I know there's probably other priorities. I just wanted to put it out there if anyone wants to try this at their local institution. It probably is something that I think would be valuable to work on.
So it wouldn't need any support from the underlying database, which makes things easier.
Yeah. At least with Folio, it's easy to create a custom field and then, you know, call whatever it is you want to call it. I can't speak for other ILSs, however.
I mean, my thought is that what we probably need is just to extend the get my profile method of the ILS driver a little bit more so that it can perhaps include arbitrary fields with arbitrary labels that get passed through to be displayed. And maybe even as a secondary option, the format could include a Boolean, is this editable kind of thing, so that we could add an update profile method so that the form could potentially add edit buttons and the ability to submit back different values if it's supported. I can see that being fairly easy to implement in a way that's backward compatible and just doesn't turn on for drivers that don't support it. But then we could plug that in for Folio and any other platforms where it might be relevant.
I have something related to that in the pipeline. So please don't go ahead and add that just yet. So I'm afraid it will be much easier to have a separate form for posting changes or requesting changes. But I think your suggestion makes sense, and it would be quite easy to implement. And we could also use it because we have some custom information there. Though it can get complicated quite quickly if there is a need for more structure in the fields, such as multi-values or things like that.
Or custom validation for that matter.
Yeah, but I mean, even for display purposes, like displaying the list of children or other dependent people or something like that, you would like to have it displayed somehow, not just comma separated, but in a nice kind of a list way.
Right.
But I think we could come up with a format that would accommodate most needs.
Yeah, as long as it's a fairly descriptive format, we can cover the minimum viable use case now, but leave room for growth.
Yeah.
Well, what we are using with the Paya API is that when we have more extended profile data, we put it into a vcard object, and that is being processed. And so you have like a standardized data format, which is vcard, and there are PHP libraries who can read vcards, and that could possibly used as a data format for storing it in the database, right? Like, and then use it in the profile on the profile pages for display and also for editing. But even, I mean, we are actually using it with the Paya API also for data exchange. So we can we put all the profile data in the vCard, and then the API and the service is processing that. But this might be useful. I don't know if that.
That's
I'm
a
not
really
familiar.
interesting idea. So I'm not sure if it supports all the fields that we would need.
Well, we would have to check that for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's as far as I know, vCard is even allows customized fields, because I know that there are some that we are even passing which are customized, I think. I would have to check that.
Certainly good to use standards if they are suitable for the use case, so worth a look. Doubling back to the theme issue momentarily, I wonder if it would be helpful to have some kind of structured way of continuing that conversation as things develop, because I think there may be a lot more opinions and a lot more activity once we do have some pull requests to look at. I'd certainly be happy to devote a significant portion of the community call to theme planning on a recurring basis, or maybe we could consider doing something else. I know there's been some discussion about, you know, community call attendance being pretty low once again. Maybe this would be something to reinvigorate it, or maybe it's a sign that we need to look at the schedule and pick a different time or day for it. Just curious if that idea appeals to anyone, or if they have any other thoughts for keeping the conversation moving as we go.
I mean, I would certainly be happy to provide updates on that regular basis. I think we're almost at the point where that kind of rapidly evolving work is just around the corner. There's just a few more helpers that are going through pull requests and reviews right now that are almost ready to go. So if that's something that we want to devote time to, that is something that I could prepare for and would be happy to do.
That's great. I'll certainly plan to start with that. But certainly if there are people who want to be in this conversation and are having difficulty joining it as things are currently structured, I would love to hear about that so that we can try to accommodate as needed. So I'm not hearing a whole lot of additional new ideas, which I think is honestly a good thing. It's a sign that we're not missing too much, and we don't have to open a ton of new Jira tickets. I do wonder, well, a couple things. First of all, are there ideas from any of the talks that we've seen this week that need to be captured in Jira tickets that haven't been? You know, I'm thinking in particular, you know, some of the authority features, or, you know, some of the browsing customizations. Are there things that would be valuable enough in core that it's worth capturing them as open work before we forget everything that we've seen? If so, I'd encourage adding them to the other ideas list. And I see in the chat a suggestion for the list, which is integration of VuFind with Wiki Data. like the authority box. Oh, and Chris is faster than me pasting it into the list. Sort of related to that, I do notice that we have a lot of really old tickets for improvements to the Wikipedia integration, which frankly is terrible and very difficult to work with. I wonder if it's worth considering, first of all, turning Wikipedia off by default, because I feel like it causes more problems than it solves. And secondly, whether perhaps a Wiki Data integration replaces the need for Wikipedia. Maybe it would even make sense to turn off Wikipedia by default, but have Wikidata on by default or something like that. I haven't really worked with these APIs personally, so I'm not sure exactly what we'd be dealing with, but you know, currently the sort of crudely parsing things out of Wikipedia source documents and sometimes missing important details just is not ideal. And maybe if we can come up with a better solution, we could close a bunch of old tickets that would then become obsolete. And again, you may hear what I'm saying being influenced by just having looked at 10-year-old Jira tickets.
Maybe I can say a few words about this, because due to the thing that I presented on Monday, we just had a look at the Wiki Data API and worked with that. So it's a JSON API. It's very powerful, but it's also a bit cryptic. So they have like lots of properties, and they only have keys for the properties. So you have to look everything up so that you know what's going on. So the implementation might not be that easy if you do something like that, but you can do many things with it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, maybe I can add that we're actually just about to start building a plugin for our VuFind catalogs that are actually polling Wikidata data into the catalogs, but already with known Wikidata identifiers. So that is like a prerequisite you have to have somehow in order to identify the records, right? But I think maybe this could be like the first step to integrate some Wikidata related code into VuFind. And from this step on, we could think about replacing it with replacing the Wikipedia integration by something like this. So right now, the plan is that we have it done by about like February, March next year. So maybe we can talk about this topic in the first quarter of next year again, and maybe come up with a plan if that's yeah.
I think that would be great. Certainly, if this is a case where you have multiple people looking at it, it sounds like there are some challenges. So having shared solutions would be beneficial.
Yeah, so we'll definitely get back to the community when we have the plugin set up, and then we can discuss how to integrate into the community.
And maybe if there's an interest, as you told on Monday, to reuse parts of our code, for example, the picture proxy or something like that, I think we can, of course, contribute that as well, and yeah, share some parts of our implementation as well. But also next year, I think this year is already pretty full.
That's great. Yeah, and I think this is something that is not absolutely urgent, so waiting till next year is fine, but this could be a source of some exciting new features, and it's always nice to have some new things in addition to just maintenance work, though the maintenance work is very important, of course. So we're about halfway through our time. I feel like we've covered a lot of the high points. I wonder if it's worth just looking together through some of the tickets from past summits to see if we're forgetting anything, or if there's anything that can be closed or that people are either eager to take on or have already done locally. Certainly, if anyone has something more interesting than that to suggest, feel free, but it might be a way to keep the conversation moving. So I'm just going to bring this up, but feel free to interrupt me with something more interesting at any time. So top of the list is the new theme, which we've already talked about. We have a lot of tickets relating to user preferences and profile. Certainly what we just talked about with being able to edit fields within the ILS is one aspect of this, which we've already talked about. But there's also the idea of being able to store VuFind specific preferences, which is something that really doesn't exist right now. And I'm not sure how needed it is. On the one hand, it comes up a lot. On the other hand, no one ever seems to implement it. So I remain open to this, but it's a long-standing unresolved thing. We have some stuff about EDM or Lido drivers, which I know was mentioned during the record manager talk as something that might come. I don't know anything about the low bid API, but maybe that's adjacent to the Wiki Data conversation in some sense, since I think this is a linked data related thing. Learning tools interoperability, again, is something that's interesting, but I'm not sure exactly what the context is in which it would apply. I'd love for use cases to be shared that would help guide this forward. The idea of displaying a map of holdings locations within the library is something that gets done as local customizations or third-party services a lot. Not totally sure how it integrates like generically into VuFind though. So I think that's a good idea, but again, needs maybe a little more guidance to move forward. We talked last year about experimenting with single page applications. I think that's still an interesting idea, but hasn't really moved forward. Reorganizing the JavaScript so that everything is namespaced or living inside objects. I think this is an issue that's sort of adjacent to the tooling question that Chris raised, which is, on the one hand, we have an existing practice of how we organize all of our custom JavaScript so that it lives within the VuFind object, and then we don't have to worry about collisions with external libraries and so forth. And not all of our custom code has ever been updated to use this new mechanism. So we could finish that work, and I think there's no reason not to finish that work. But I also imagine there's a possibility that in the new theme with different tooling, we do something more modern that solves the same problem. I don't know, Chris, do you have any thoughts about that? Is this still relevant, or does this need to be sort of redefined?
My feelings, my personal opinion is that it perhaps needs to be redefined. Not only because we did move a lot of the code into a VuFind object, but also newer JavaScript conventions like modules and things like that mean that you can have more private, unaccessible functions and things like that that are much less likely to collide, especially if we're going framework agnostic. So maybe this needs to be redefined. I think keeping it here is important, and I'm not sure there's a clear name to give it. It's just, I think this is something that does need to be revisited as far as like, how do we actually approach this?
Given that,
I agree. We need to read it, but actually we need to define it. It doesn't really provide any description on how to do things. So I think it would make sense to do that and take into account that we now require ES6. So it should be easier. Nevertheless, it still needs to take into account that some things need to be overridable. So taking things private may cause trouble as well.
to put a comment on here now that we do require ES6 that perhaps opens the door to new strategies. But yes, good point that extensibility is still a major consideration we need to find. So yeah, I'd love to see everything be more readable in the future, and I think ES6 does offer some promise in that area. Doc values is another conversation that keeps coming up and never gets fully resolved. And I think this thread in this ticket ended with me saying, well, we can look at this again after we upgrade to Solar 8. And now we have upgraded to Solar 8, but I still don't have all the answers. So again, if people have thoughts on how we should approach doc values, and if we need to change our schema to better make use of them, this is the place to comment on that. It clearly seems like this isn't something that's killing us to not address, but there may be significant enhancements to be made by doing it properly.
If I may just chime in and say that yes, we need doc values. A small database can go without them, but larger ones would certainly benefit from doc values. And even if in some cases the absolute performance might be a little bit lower, at least the memory usage and things like that would certainly favor doc values.
So I think the question that's never been fully resolved is how to identify the circumstances under which doc values should be enabled on fields. And I think one sticking point is that there are some places where we're using Solr analyzers to manipulate values that simply do not work in doc value land. But again, it's been a couple of years since I really looked at this, so maybe I'm misremembering all the details.
Well, for text fields, of course, doc values don't make sense as far as I know, but we should be using doc values for any field that it's possible. That's how I see it.
So maybe there's a low-hanging pull request that just adds doc values to everything that can have doc values, and we worry about the harder edge cases later when we need to.
I'd be happy to post one.
That would be fantastic.
Can you assign the
I will do that.
to me right away? Thanks. Otherwise, I'll definitely forget it.
Another one, we've talked about this at several consecutive summits, I think as far back as 2016, is modernizing spell check to use new features introduced in Solar 4. Now we're on Solar 8. We still haven't done it. I think the code got written at a past summit and then lost, and then we never doubled back. So again, I don't know if anyone has actually already done this locally and has something to contribute, but I suspect we may at least be able to simplify some of our code by leveraging these things, which might be desirable. Cache clearing support for the API is a very small piece that we've talked about before, and I don't think is an emergency.
Yes, but I have it in progress, if you noticed.
Oh, look at that. Wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
Also displaying barcodes or QR codes in the user account, I think was discussed at a past summit, but maybe still pending. And result count for advanced search. It's another past discussion. We talked about the JSON Facet API. That's clearly rising in priority. triple IF content awareness is something that I think I might even have proposed. And with some of the work we're doing at Villanova to modernize our digital library platform, maybe there will be opportunities for me to contribute something related to that. It might be a little early to say, but it's certainly on my mind. We have this documentation task of talking about how to obtain commercial metadata for building local indexes. I think we were hoping that maybe some of the German institutions that have been successful in doing this might share some of their experiences somewhere. That would still be great, but it's also not holding back the project if it doesn't happen. Allowing export of large lists to CSV, still an open issue. I think one of the challenges here is that this sort of points to some kind of job queuing system that doesn't currently exist in VuFind, and you know, maybe it's worth introducing one, but that makes this a larger task. Or you just implement it as something that happens synchronously, but then you have to worry more about memory and time and other constraints. But again, I see why this is a desirable feature, and it would be worth working on if it's a priority for anyone. This guy, update and expand support for MARC linking fields, I think is pretty low-hanging fruit, because at least the last time I reviewed this, I found that there was really only one linking field that we didn't already support. So, you know, if somebody wants a good first issue, maybe this is a good first issue. I don't think it's super urgent though.
Right. Galen here, speaking as somebody who needs to learn more about hacking on VuFind core. This looks right up my alley.
Oh, that's great. Well, if you would like to take this on, by all means, and I'd be happy to share some orientation of where you need to look to do it as well, if that would help.
Great, thanks.
All right, and Chris, if you don't mind taking a note about that, so I remember to send Galen an email, then I will. Exported list link shortening. I think this was addressing the problem that if you export a ton of things, the URL can be absurdly huge, and maybe we need a way to work around that. Again, I haven't heard much about this since the last summit, but I'll just raise it again as something that was raised before. Refactor complex factories for extensibility. I think this is sort of a general maintenance kind of thing that I raised, just wondering whether there are some factories that could be simplified, or you know, things that need to be moved into their own factories separately. Particularly, I think I had in mind the search backend factories, which, you know, build the backends and then attach a whole bunch of listeners to them. Maybe it would make sense to have separate factories for some of our listeners. But I think I did review this and I didn't find really obvious room for improvement, which is why I didn't act upon it. But the ticket's still open. Maybe I'll take another look at that. And again, open to suggestions if people have thoughts in this area. Explore Solr's graph capabilities. This is a very broad ticket. Maybe this is a thing that we need to look into more and find a way to use. I think there's a lot of value in Solr that we're not taking advantage of because it grows and changes a lot, and we have most of what we need, so we don't look at everything closely. This is an area we could potentially investigate more. Mechanism for loading language files and configurations for modules. This was talked about. I think it sounds like this is coming soon. So I look forward to it. Scenario-based drill down recommendation module was sort of a suggestion inspired by one of the talks last year. I think there's still potential to work on something there. Also, it will be helpful to have access to that talk. We're a bit behind on our video editing, but I think that all of the 2020 Summit talks should be online relatively soon, and you won't have to wait a whole year for this year's. We are really making great headway. Thanks in large part to Lila Gonzalez joining the video editing team along with Chris. So there's now not just one person buried under all this raw video. Moving on, VidaLibre API compatibility. Again, this is an API I'm not personally familiar with, but if somebody's using it and wants to share something, that would be great. Configurable autocomplete is another one that's been around for a while, and I think we saw in at least one of the demos today, or not today, this week, that there's another implementation of this kind of thing where we want more than one type of suggestion in the autocomplete menu, and it would be nice to have kind of a standard way to do that. I suspect by this point we have multiple competing implementations in the wild, but maybe somebody can contribute and then we can compare notes and come to a standard approach to this. So certainly I would encourage, if anybody is in a position to share something, please do. I also don't know if Chris has thoughts on this, as he's sort of the maintainer of our built-in autocomplete library.
I'm sorry. Oh, go ahead, Ari. Sorry.
Sorry. Please assign to me, and I'll at some point try to contribute something.
Will do. I see you reported it, but weren't assigned to it. So
I've also expanded the library, the autocomplete library that was written for VuFind to handle groups to make this easier, but never got around to the next step of it. This is something I was actually just debating whether or not I should put on the, whether or not and where I should put on the list, because that seems to be a feature that is appearing more and more in VuFind instances. So.
Next up, we have evaluate moving alphabetical browse into Solr. And again, this is something, we saw discussed during the summit. Implementations exist. I think this ticket talks particularly about, the University of Pennsylvania implementation with some custom Solr plugins, but maybe there are other ways. I think I heard the terms component mentioned. Again, I'd love to do something with this. And if somebody has something already working that's perhaps possible to contribute in some form, that gives us a little bit of progress forward and something to discuss and refine. Docker instance for VuFind beginners. Lots of people are using VuFind with Docker, but there's not kind of a single place to start. And I think that's in part because there are so many choices you have to make and there's no right answer. It's hard to decide where to begin or what to recommend. But again, if nothing else, there might be room to improve some of our documentation in the wiki or provide more specific guidance for people looking to do this. So Docker experts are encouraged to share if they wish. And we do have some examples and thoughts here already. Here's one that hasn't been talked about in a few years, but this is OAuth sort of single sign-on support. I think VuFind currently has at least a couple of authentication modules that use OAuth in some form or another, but we don't have a generic implementation. And I think some of our specific implementations may not actually work correctly. So certainly interested in this if somebody wants to take it on, but without a use case, it's a complicated task to do just for the theory of it. I think there might also even be an open pull request that touches on this in some way. Support for Elasticsearch was something we experimented with in 2016, and I think we stopped because we didn't have an easy and convenient way to index MARC records into Elasticsearch, and weren't sure how to extend SolarMark to do that. I know that there have subsequently been concerns about Elasticsearch's licensing. I don't know if there's really any demand for this or not. It's an interesting theoretical problem, but I like Solar well enough. I'm not desperate to do this, but it remains open in case, again, there's a compelling reason to do it.
Yeah. To add a comment to that, while I personally also don't feel any particular impetus to work on this myself, I will point out that if somebody else is interested in it, one place to look might be Koha, which has implemented MARC record indexing in Elasticsearch. So very different code base, but some of the ideas might carry over.
Good to know.
Yeah, I've been working on that a little bit. So there are a couple of different options on how to index MARC in Elasticsearch with Koha. And one of them will provide the possibility to also search that indexed data, which is kind of neat and useful for some power use cases. But other than that, I share the issues with the licensing. Of course, there is whatever it was, what Amazon is now working on. So, but the future is a little bit unclear to me, and unless there is a really compelling use case for Elasticsearch, I wouldn't put too much work in implementing support for it. Though I must admit there is at least one thing that Solar is still missing, is that support for hierarchical fields. That would be really nice in many cases, but we can still work without that.
And I mean, as far as the indexing piece goes, I think the way that SolarMark is developed is, it reads the configuration and it maps everything into a data structure of fields and values, and then it sends that data to Solar. So it feels to me like it would be possible to just have a configurable option in SolarMark where that last step goes to Elasticsearch instead of Solar, and then you'd end up with a more or less identical thing that VuFind could work with more easily, if one wanted to go down this road. But we haven't gone down the road yet.
And then you would have to rename the software.
Yes, indeed. We're nearly at the end of this list, by the way, but here's another really low-hanging fruit one, standardized ILS driver parameters, which just observes that we have, the same functions that conform to the same specification in all of our ILS drivers, but we name the parameters of the functions differently from driver to driver in some cases, which, if nothing else, is inconvenient if you're copying and pasting comments between drivers, etc. It might be nice to align them all for consistency, but that's entirely cosmetic. And perhaps there are reasons in some cases where the inconsistent parameters are actually more clear. But if somebody wanted to, they could work on this. And finally, there was discussion again back in 2016, I can't believe it's been that long, about moving the ILS drivers to a separate project, which might be useful for people who want to interface with an ILS through PHP, but aren't necessarily using VuFind. I have mixed feelings about this at this point, because managing a whole bunch of repositories can have its own set of problems, though I do see the advantages as well. Obviously, it's been 5 years and we haven't felt compelled to do this urgently. So I leave it open. certainly if we wanted to do it, it might be interesting to look at something like the Laminas cache project, which recently split up so that Laminas cache is its own package, and then all of the cache adapters have their own separate packages, and so everything can be maintained separately. But then, you know, that, as I say, becomes a huge amount of repository maintenance for the benefit of greater granularity. I don't know that I want to commit to that right now, but it's an option that could be considered. So that's gotten us to within 20 minutes of the end of our scheduled time. I don't want to bore people with more ticket reading. There are certainly more tickets we could look at, but I think that's perhaps diminishing returns. So I'm just going to open the floor one more time and see if others have any more issues they want to talk about. And if not, I think we do have some direction and some plans that we can work with. And I'd be happy to wrap up a few minutes early. So I'll just wait a moment or two.
Just wanted to mention that I will go ahead and, if nothing else, at least write up GR tickets for some of the ideas that I expressed during my presentation about adding things like fine payment support to iOS drivers and the like.
Yeah, that would be excellent. And interestingly, as far as fine payment goes, I feel like someone reached out to us about this maybe 8 years ago or some very long time. And we actually implemented something in a branch and then asked them to try it out. And then communication was lost and nothing happened. But at that time, it wasn't a lot of work. So hopefully it still wouldn't be a lot of work to get this in some kind of standard fashion. As you say, at first as an outgoing link, and then we could look into something built in as we have more time to develop. All right, well, I'm not hearing anything else, so I think we can wrap up about 15 minutes early. I just want to once again thank everyone who's participated in this event. We've had a lot of speakers with a lot of interesting topics. I appreciate everyone taking the time to share with us and to join us here. And thanks also to everyone who's been in this conversation today and who have taken on tickets and volunteered to contribute code. This is all really what makes the project work. So thank you again. I look forward to doing this again in a year and talking to you, of course, quite a bit in between through the community calls, the project management committee, and whatever else we come up with. I think there's still lots of room for the community to grow and improve. And I'm happy that we've made so much progress just in the last year. All right, and with that, I will sign off. So enjoy the rest of your days, and we'll speak again soon. Bye for now.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.